few weeks ago I read a great story about Winston Churchill. In 1945, just after the Second World War, Churchill was at dinner when a woman at the table asked him in front of everyone, now that it is all over, what was your worst moment in the war? The fall of France, the threat of invasion, the Blitz? And after a minute, Churchill responded, frankly, my dear, I enjoyed every moment of it. He enjoyed, he said, the fight. Now, did he really enjoy sleeping in his underground war room on a cot while bombs fell above him? I doubt it. But in retrospect, looking back on the experience of that great war, one of the leaders of the free world said that he enjoyed it all. In other words, he was glad to be involved in a great cause. He was glad to be shaping history. He was glad to be involved in defeating the evils of Nazism. This willingness to fight is perhaps the primary reason Churchill became prime minister over Great Britain in the first place. It was 1940, he was in his mid-60s. It appeared his political career was over. He'd experienced a number of setbacks, both politically and privately, but there was a great cause for him to address. William Manchester, at the end of the first volume of his series, The Last Lion, captured Churchill's position just a few years earlier when in 1932, Lady Astor, the larger-than-life first female member of Parliament, Lady Astor was having a conversation with Joseph Stalin, the dictator of the Soviet Union, and he was quizzing her on the political landscape in Britain. And Astor prattled on about any number of figures who were having success in their political careers, and particularly was somewhat obsessed with the up-and-coming star Neville Chamberlain. And Stalin said to her, "What about Churchill?" She said, "Churchill? Oh, he's finished." Well, what we know now about Neville Chamberlain, the thing he's most famous for, of course, and most of us remember this, is that he compromised with Hitler as Hitler's armies were marching across Europe, and he's the guy, Prime Minister of England, who came home from being totally taken advantage of by Hitler, and he said, "We have peace in our time." Well, Churchill had another view. Churchill's view was, we're going to have to fight to save the world. Eventually, most world leaders, including many in Britain, saw no choice but to cede Europe to Hitler. But not Churchill. He insisted that Britain fight, and the British people gave him the power to do so. And his gift back to them when elected prime minister was a challenge to fight. You're familiar with this speech. A few days on the job, newly appointed British Prime Minister Winston Churchill gave the speech where he said, "We are in the preliminary phase of one of the greatest battles in history. I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat. We have before us an ordeal of the most grievous kind. We have before us many, many months of struggle and suffering. You ask, what is our policy? I say it is to wage war by land, sea, and air, war with all our might and with all the strength God has given us, and to wage war against a monstrous tyranny never surpassed in the dark and lamentable catalog of human crime. You ask, what is our aim? Churchill said. I can answer in one word. It is victory. Victory at all cost, victory in spite of all terrors, victory however long and hard the road may be, for without victory there is no survival. I mention this because Churchill is an extreme example of someone willing to fight for a great cause. And I believe that all of us must have the will to fight for something great. In fact, even a certain part of us that revels in the battle. Theodore Roosevelt, I thought, captured this beautifully outside the context of literal war, when he wrote about his time as a young man in North Dakota, where he was a rancher and a deputy sheriff. And he said this, and I just love this quote because it captures the spirit of a willingness to fight. He said, "We knew toil and hardship and hunger and thirst, and we saw men die violent deaths as they worked among the horses and the cattle or fought in evil feuds with one another. But we felt the beat of hardy life in our veins, and ours was the glory of work and the joy of living." You just have to love this robustness, this approach to life that leans forward and says, I'm involved in a great cause, it's a great sacrifice, but I like feeling my heart beat stronger as I try to do something great. Now, in a even more day-to-day kind of way, just one more example to set this message up today and to kind of give you a sense of the spirit of this thing. Seth Godin, in his book Lynchpin, talked about how that some people at work distinguish themselves as others. They are, he says, linchpins, not cogs. And he said, consider the customer service troubleshooter, the dervish who walks into any situation and makes it better. Her posture is forward. She's looking for opportunities. She wants to mix it up. She looks for trouble. Trouble gives her a chance to delight. I love it. If you want to distinguish yourself in this world, if you want to do something great, there has to be a part of you that looks for trouble. A part of you that takes delight in a good fight. So I hope to give us a proper mindset now as we focus on today's talk. Last week, I focused on believing God to work miracles in our lives, and I was most focused on the kind of miracles that happen instantly when we pray. And I'm still interested in that, of course. But my main focus today is more on the big, miraculous, audacious goals that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. Goals so audacious that they are beyond our reach unless God works miracles. Goals that are in alignment with God's dreams for our lives. But I've learned that even when God calls us to believe for and work towards God goals, that we still have to fight to see them come to pass. Even things that will ultimately turn out with a miraculous ending has as part of its process a battle to be had. And that's why step 4 of how to see the miraculous in our lives as we continue this series is that we must fight for the miraculous. Now, I've been teaching some of the themes found in the Old Testament histories called Ezra and Nehemiah. And throughout Ezra and Nehemiah, there is a theme of resistance to the miracle and miracles that God was working. And this story of God's people having to stand against those who were fighting and opposing them. It seems counterintuitive. If God is working a miracle, why should we have to fight for it? And I want to respond to that by a couple simple points. First of all, this is just the way the world is as a result of the fall. Evil always resists good. If you're trying to accomplish something good, expect to face resistance. But then secondly, and what I want to flesh out just a little bit more, is that God uses the struggles in our lives to accomplish His purposes in us. We must always remember that there's more going on in the accomplishment of a goal than the accomplishment of the goal, even a God goal. God is first and foremost interested in conforming us to the image of Jesus. He's working in our lives to grow us, to shape us, to prepare us for better life now and forever. There's a passage in Romans that I think speaks to this in some way. It's a well-known passage, at least the first verse, where Paul says, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose, right? We know that God's working in our lives, and He's working all things together for our good. And then there's a larger context that's offered but rarely mentioned. He then says, for God For those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, so that he might be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. Understand, God has two goals in Romans 8:29, in which he's working together all things for our good. The first goal is those who he predestined, he determined would be conformed to the image of his Son. In other words, those that God saw beforehand, God determined that we would become like Jesus. The image of Jesus would be formed in our lives. And then he has this other goal, and this other goal is to bring many sons and daughters to himself, which causes me to say that we must understand, even as God is at work in the grand scheme of things, accomplishing his goals in the world and working through us to accomplish our part of that big picture, he's also at work in us as individuals, forming the image of Christ in us. So, when you have a big God-given goal, just know there's more going on in you than that goal being accomplished. That's important. God gave you the goal. It's a part of what he's doing in the world. He wants to help you accomplish it. But another part of what's going on is as you're struggling to see that goal come to pass, God is working things in you that really is more of his goal than the big goal that you're trying to achieve. So you're saying, God, you gave me this dream. Why am I struggling so much? And God's answer back, if I can be so presumptuous, is to say, because I'm trying to form in you the image of Jesus. And so I want both things to be happening in your life at the same time. The Desert Fathers are famous for their contemplation. And in one story, a younger brother came to his spiritual father and boasted, "I find myself in peace without an enemy." And his spiritual father replied, "Go beseech God to stir up warfare that you may regain the affliction that you used to have, for it is by warfare that the soul makes progress." All right? So why do we have to fight to see the miracle thing that God wants us to have come to pass? Because that goal is happening in the context of God's goal in your life to make you a better person, a person who's more like Jesus. Now, for the briefest of backgrounds regarding Ezra and Nehemiah, which I want to get into here in a moment, which we've been teaching in and out of over the last several weeks, and that I'm now going to base, having said all of that, my real talk on today. Let me just remind you or catch you up if you're new, kind of let you know a thumbnail of a lot we've been talking about that provides context for this message. In 538 BC, some Jews were miraculously returned from 50 years of exile in Babylon to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. About 20 years later, the temple was finished. We talked about that last week. Some 70 years after that, 445 BC, Nehemiah, a Jewish official in the court of the Persian emperor, went to Jerusalem to rebuild the wall surrounding Jerusalem that had been torn down some 142 years earlier. Each week, I'm extrapolating from these rich histories to show how God worked through his people to accomplish, let me say it this way, how God worked in and through his people to accomplish goals so large that they could only have been done by God's miraculous power. This week I want to focus on a section of Nehemiah that demonstrates how Nehemiah and the other leaders in the Ezra and Nehemiah story had to fight to see God's dreams for them come true. So when you read the story of Nehemiah leading up to what I'm about to talk about, you see Nehemiah, an official in the court of the Persian Emperor Artaxerxes, who gets word from Jerusalem, which is some 800 miles away, that though there's been a return from exile of many of the Jewish people, and though the temple has been built, the wall around the city is still torn down. And In that day, a city without a wall was a city that could not take care of itself, protect itself, have enough jobs. I mean, everything's about the wall being secure around a city in ancient times. When Nehemiah hears the wall still torn down, even though it's something he had known, he's moved by it. He prays and fasts and mourns for many days. He goes to the Persian Emperor Artaxerxes, who he knew well, and asks him for permission to take a group of Jews back to Jerusalem to rebuild the wall. Artaxerxes says yes. He gives him a small army, a lot of resources, and Nehemiah takes his trip 800 miles to Jerusalem. And when he gets there, here's the first thing that happens. Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 10. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official heard about this, they were very much disturbed that someone had come to promote the welfare of the Israelites. Another translation says, but when Sanballat and Tobiah heard of my arrival, they were very displeased that someone had come to help the people of Israel. I want you to consider this. Why are you here, Nehemiah? I want to promote the welfare of the people. Well, we can't be having that here. I mean, it's essentially what these guys said. Nehemiah simply wants to help people, and now he's going to receive constant opposition from these two characters, Sanballat and Tobiah. Sanballat was the governor of Samaria, the region that was north of Jerusalem. Tobiah was an official in the kingdom of Ammon, which was east of Jerusalem. But it wasn't just these guys, though their names are often mentioned in this Nehemiah story. You also see later that Nehemiah and the people were surrounded by enemies. Nehemiah 4:7, but when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the people of Ashdod heard that the repairs to Jerusalem's walls had gone ahead and that the gaps were being closed, they were very angry. So Mark Roberts, in his commentary on Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther, wrote, Sanballat and Tobiah had rallied a considerable alliance, including the Arabs, the Ammonites, the Ashdodites, against tiny Judah, Jerusalem. Nehemiah and his band were surrounded with Sanballat and the Samaritans to the north, Tobiah and the Ammonites on the east, the Arabs to the south, and the Ashdodites on the west. Listen, if you ever have an enemy, you don't want it to be the Ashdodites. Do you know why? I don't either, but it's interesting to say. They're surrounded. That's the point. They're surrounded by enemies who oppose their effort to simply do good, because these enemies are going to lose their ability to take advantage of God's people in Jerusalem. Nehemiah 4 kind of captures the whole picture. I'm going to read a long reading and then kind of dig into it as we move forward. This is going to give you a sense of things. You got to kind of listen close to this, and I'm reading fast because I've got a lot to say in a short amount of time, unless you want to stay here through the first half of the 1 o'clock games, which is fine with me. Here it is, Nehemiah 4. When Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and was greatly incensed. He ridiculed the Jews. Tobiah said, what are they building? Even a fox climbing on it would break down their wall of stones. And then Nehemiah prays, hear us, our God, for we are despised. Now listen to this prayer. This is called a prayer of imprecation. It's a prayer of curses against the enemy, all right? We'll talk about it in a moment. Here's Nehemiah's prayer. Hear us, our God, for we are despised. Turn their insults back on their own heads. Give them over as plunder in a land of captivity. Do not cover up their guilt or blot out their sins from your sight, for they have thrown insults in the face of the builders. And then Nehemiah continues his narrative. So we rebuilt the wall till all of it reached half its height, for the people worked with all their heart. But when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the people of Ashdod, the Ashdodites again, heard, I just like saying that, Ashdodites, heard that the repairs to Jerusalem's walls had gone ahead and that the gaps were being closed, they were very angry. They all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and stir up trouble against it. But we prayed to our God and posted a guard day and night to meet this threat. Meanwhile, the people in Judah said, the strength of the laborers is giving out. The people get discouraged. Also, our enemies said, before they know it or see us, we will be right there among them and will kill them and put an end to the work. Then the Jews who lived near them came and told us 10 times over, wherever you turn, they will attack us. Therefore, Nehemiah said, I stationed some of the people behind the lowest points of the wall at the exposed places, posting them by families with their swords, spears, and bows. Don't be afraid of them. This is what Nehemiah says now. Remember the Lord who was great and awesome, and fight for your families, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your homes. From that day on, half of my men did the work, while the other half were equipped with spears, shields, bows, and armor. Then I said, wherever you hear the sound of the trumpet, join us there. Our God will fight for us. Well, let me respond to that and kind of start summing up what I've been rambling on about by offering 4 fighting thoughts. All right? Here's the first one. It's to expect the fight. Expect the fight. That's just the way it is. Again, Nehemiah 2:10. Ballot and Tobiah were very much disturbed that someone had come to promote the welfare of the Israelites. I love what Paul said when he wrote to the Corinthians. And he said, a great door for effective work has opened to me. And there are many who oppose me. I don't know how many times in my life I have experienced that. Here's the good news. A great opportunity has come to me. And then, the next day, if it takes that long, here comes the bad news. Somewhere, somehow, whatever door has been opened, as I'm walking through it, there's resistance on the other side. This is the way it is if you're walking through doors for effective work. This is just the way it is. I'll read to you a couple paragraphs from Live 10. If you're new, I don't ever read from my own book, but it makes sense today. And also, I didn't know they were doing this whole funny thing about my book, which embarrassed me, but it was kind of fun, wasn't it? Anyway, here's what I wrote. You need to know that you're going to have enemies. Some of these enemies are human beings. Then there are the spiritual forces behind human beings. You have to prepare for this certainty and not be shocked when inevitable opposition rolls your way. Don't be disheartened when you have a dream, a sense of calling, an understanding of your destiny, and all kinds of forces around you seem to conspire to stop it all. Most any change effort brings opposition. Leaders are frequently warned that their efforts to bring change to organizations or individuals will bring resistance, perhaps from the very people the leaders are trying to help. Why? That's just how people are. Expect the fight. So, I don't know why I've been telling recently so many stories about our history here at TLCC. I guess because we're launching a new era. And it seems like some of our history is important to understanding our future. And certainly around this idea of expecting a fight. When we purchased our first building some 22 years ago, we'd been meeting in a succession of rented spaces for about 4 years. When we purchased our first building at 106 Harrison Avenue, just off of Main Street here in West Orange, there was a tremendous outcry from the neighbors, and some of you remember that. Some of you were neighbors then, and you've crossed the other side. And there was tremendous opposition, crazy opposition. And they had a problem with the church coming in and influencing that neighborhood. After all, the walls of this church, which looked like a store from the outside, it was an old bowling alley that had been converted into a number of things, was a printing factory when we bought it. We're taking this printing factory, stationery store, a little beauty parlor, we're making it into a church. This is quite a terrible thing, isn't it? Especially when the walls of the building are adjoined on one side to the liquor lobby and the other side to Paulie's Pub. I mean, what a terrible thing to think about a church coming to this neighborhood. Well, there was a tremendous outcry. We weren't known in the community very well at that time, though I had started to build a lot of relationships that ended up serving us really well. But there's a tremendous outcry, and we end up getting into a zoning battle where that lasted for 6 months. It was very expensive. We didn't have enough money really to fight it well. A lawyer donated her time. We'd have town hall meetings. Well, every town hall meeting was so full everybody couldn't get in the room. Neighbors would stand up, point their finger in my face, say terrible things. It was an incredible experience. I had hair before it, and now I'm like this. It was terrible. Really, truly, it was terrible as we're fighting for our future. We believed that this building was a miracle, that that's where we're supposed to be. But it feels like that we're trying to do heaven's work and all hell has broken loose. Well, in this process, I went to, there's a civic association for that area of town. It's called the Eagle Rock Civic Association. And they invited me to come because there was this is such a huge thing. This is front page news, West Orange Chronicle, Star Ledger. It's all over the place, right? This battle. I was invited to speak to the Eagle Rock Civic Association. The Civic Association was going to vote as to whether or not to support our application for the zoning board. It was a big moment. I show up. You have to remember I'm a real young guy at that time. We're going back 22 years. I show up. I make a speech. They vote. And I think that if I remember correctly, we won the vote by one person. It was like 26 to 25. Now, here's the other part of that story. I joined the Eagle Rock Civic Association. As I got there that night, we won by one vote. Anyway, you have to pray and plan. But anyway, soon thereafter, somebody printed a flyer that was filled with total fabrications about me and about the church. The truth is, I tried to remember this week exactly what was said, and I'd be happy to tell you if I could remember. Some of you might, and if you do, you can yell it out, it's fine with me. They said terrible things about me. Somebody just went and made up things. I think a lot of it was I was a tax cheat for some reason. Anyway, it was terrible. And they put it on cars all over, and they put it in people's mailboxes. I'm eating at Paparazzi at the Short Hills Mall late on a Friday night with my family. We're trying to have some respite from this huge battle that's consuming our lives. I get a call from Robert Parisi. Robert Parisi was the president of the Eagle Rock Civic Association. I didn't know this guy. He just said, listen, there's such an uproar, Pastor, that we're going to have to withdraw our support of the Eagle Rock Civic Association. This was a big thing for us. If they would get up and support us, it's likely that this may very well happen. And I said, listen, I know we don't know each other well, but could I talk you into coming and meeting me tonight, and let's discuss this? He was kind enough to come and meet. We left the restaurant, went home. This guy, who I didn't know again, came and met me at the house, and we sat there and we went back and forth, and I had to stand and convince him why this wasn't true, and that wasn't true, and this wasn't true, and that wasn't true. And about 1 a.m, he finally says, you know what? I'm sorry. I'm going to take whatever heat I have to. We're going to support you, and I think that you'd be a great addition to the neighborhood. Well, a few weeks later, we in fact won that battle and went on with our future. It was miraculous. And Rob Parisi, that guy, became one of my closest friends in this town. And he now is the long-term mayor of West Orange, New Jersey, and has been a huge blessing to us in the battle that we fought for this building. All right? So somehow in this process, and I could tell stories all day about that, God did a work in me. God brought me to people who ended up years later being a blessing to us when we came here and fought for 747. You would think now, we're in 17 years down at 106 Harrison Avenue. Seriously, hardly any time would ever go by when someone who used to fight against us would come up and say, Pastor, I'm sorry, I'm so-and-so. You're such a great addition to this community. We're so glad you're here. We hope that you don't move out. You're the anchor of this part of town, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, the thing had tied now, we're beloved in the town, right? We come here, lots of miracles happen for us to get this property. We go to make an application to the zoning board, and guess what happens? A group of neighbors decide that they want to oppose us. Again, somebody prints a flyer, passes it out all over the place once we're in this battle, and they fabricate a bunch of stuff, including the big thing that they said, I do remember this, was that in fact what we were saying this was a church, but we really were building an inpatient drug rehab rehabilitation center because we cared so much about people in recovery, and people didn't want that to come to this part of town. Well, we were well known, and we still have been and we will be well known with Celebrate Recovery for our outreach to people in recovery. That's a big part of who we are, and we're proud of it. But we weren't building an inpatient drug center. And then they said that we were going to have a soup kitchen here, and you can't have a soup kitchen in this part of town. Well, we have been involved proudly in the Christine Soup Kitchen on Main Street, one of their biggest supporters. Our volunteers work there regularly. We've been involved in that for probably 20-some years, and we will be as long as I'm alive to make sure that it happens. But we weren't putting a soup kitchen here, and that kind of stuff is going on. Here was a news story that came out just to give you a sense of the flavor. What terrible people we are coming here and trying to put this church here. Check this out.
This is News 12 New Jersey, as local news gets.
We're glad to have you with us. I'm Janine Strafasi. At a time when churches are closing schools and selling stained glass windows to pay the bills, there's a church coming to West Orange that is growing and fast. The Life Christian Church is planning to build a large new building at 747 Northfield Ave in West Orange, and that plan is meeting with resistance from neighbors. It's our top story this half hour. News 12 New Jersey's Bonnie Drucker is at the site of this new church. Bonnie.
Janine, right now this is a big pile of dirt in the middle of a construction site. We talked to Pastor Terry Smith, and he said he thought he would be welcomed in this neighborhood.
These guys are just getting back from the airport after being in Uganda.
Yeah! Woo! Pastor Terry Smith is proud of his church members who volunteered in Africa with children who lost their parents to HIV and AIDS.
We're a non-denominational Christian church, and we try to teach positive values.
Smith says his church is growing and moving to a new location in West Orange. I want to show you something. This happens to be a drawing of the church to be. It's equipped with a retention pond, some waterfalls, and other beautiful features. But the pastor says he's now hitting a brick wall. Susan Robinson is a block president down the street from the new church site and is concerned the church reaches out to 9 New Jersey counties and may bring people with problems to her neighborhood.
If there are problems in certain areas, I think those problems should be addressed in those areas. I don't think you should bring those problems into areas that don't have this problem.
Pastor Smith says he celebrates his church's 12-step program and diversity.
They said that we're building a drug treatment center there and a soup kitchen there, which, though those things are wonderful, we in fact are not doing that on that property.
I don't mean to imply that we don't want to be helpful, but it's just the volume of what they're doing we think is too great.
Now, Mrs. Robinson is going to the next couple of planning meetings. She's getting signatures from people in her neighborhood. But, Janine, that's not really going to help at this point because construction on the actual building here is going to start in November. Now back to you.
All right, and we, of course, will follow this story.
Look at all the problems we have brought to this neighborhood. Look at this. All the trouble we've brought. I hope you get my point. My point is, what are you trying to do? I'm trying to do something good. I'm trying to help people. We're trying to change people's lives. Yes, you better believe we're trying to help people who need to recover. That's part of what we do. And Sam Ballot and Tobiah stand there and say, not here. It's not going to happen here. I'm saying to you that you should expect, I have so much I could say about all of that, but I'm saying to you that you should expect, don't be surprised when you're the person trying to bring the right thing in the picture and people are fighting you. Expect the fight. Listen, a couple of weeks ago, after a lot of prayer and thought and meetings and discussion among our leadership here, we introduced our new big, miraculous, audacious goal at the Life Christian Church. And we formally launched the new era, the future of this church, now that we're here and settled in this building and all of that stuff. What did we do this for? We've been talking about this for years. Well, we launched our new Vision 2025, TLCC times 5 equals 10K by 2025. And so what we've said is that our big, miraculous, audacious goal is that by 2025, we will launch at least 4 new multi-sites in communities in this area who need us just like this community needs us here, which means we'll have 5 campuses by 2025. Now, listen, that's not going to be easy. We're going to have the same, here's part of the deal. We are signing up for the same kind of struggles times 5 in the next 8 years. And someone may say, you're a little crazy, aren't you? Well, I'm just going to say this to you. Sometimes we go looking for trouble because we're trying, not for the sake of trouble. We're trying to do a good work. We're trying to see people come to Jesus. We want to preach the gospel in places where it's not represented well right now in this metropolitan area. We're doing a great work together, and we're signing up to keep battling to see the cause of Christ fulfilled through our lives. And we're also saying that we're believing God that by 2025, we're going to have 5 times our average Easter attendance since we've moved in this auditorium, which is 2,747. We're talking about somewhere around 5 times that. We're believing by 2025 that we're going to have at least one weekend that represents the growth of our church that has over 10,000 people in attendance. Not just here, but here and in the 4 other campuses, our 5 campuses here at TLCC. Listen, it's going to take miracles for this to happen, but I'm encouraging you to think, to have a mentality that says, I don't just want to go to church. I don't just want to go to church and sit there and be comfortable. I'm interested in more than a fireplace and a perfect place for my kids and all of that. I hope I'm the person they ask to go help launch that new church in some community who needs us. And maybe we'll start out in some high school auditorium or a theater on a Sunday morning or wherever it may be. But you're going to have an opportunity to be a part of a new story in a new era at the Life Christian Church, where we're going to stand years from now and say, this was the fight that we had to go through to see this miracle happen, but look at what God did. Here's the second thing. And if you're wondering if I'm in trouble time-wise, the answer is yes. Here's the second thing. Who plays at 1 o'clock, Jets or Giants? Giants. They're losing. I mean, 0-4. They need to hear this sermon. Fight. Fight. The Jets are showing you up. Anyway, learn to fight. And how about the Yankees? God have mercy. Anyway. Learn to fight. Here's the 144th Psalm. Praise be to the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war, my fingers for battle. Listen, guys, prayer is the most important part of the fight. Not the only part, but the most important part. When these enemies came against Nehemiah, Nehemiah immediately prayed. He said, hear us, our God, for we are despised. Turn their insults back on their heads. And then he prayed that ferocious prayer against his enemies. It wrapped up this way. They all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and stir up trouble against it. But we prayed to our God and posted a guard day and night to meet this threat. So we need to pray, and we need to take the actions that flow from prayer to do what needs to be done. But it's always pray first. I suggest that we think about prayer in this wise in 4 ways. First of all, talk to God. This is our definition of prayer around here. Talk to God about what you and He are doing together. Just talk to God about what's going on. Talk to Him. Listen. Learn to, some of you say, I don't know how to pray. Talk to God about what's happening in your life. Talk to God. That doesn't have to be that complicated. Talk to God. Expect then for Him to speak into your heart and you develop relationship with him. Secondly, pray for your enemies. Nehemiah prayed an imprecatory prayer, which was a prayer against his enemies. But Jesus told us that we're supposed to pray for our enemies. So we can say that's how Nehemiah prayed. There's something to be learned from it, which I'll mention in a moment. But we need to understand that that's not necessarily how we pray, because we don't pray against people. We pray for people, even our enemies. But that's not where it ends. The third thing is that we pray against the evil forces that influence the people who are opposing us. Ephesians 6:12 tells us we are not fighting against people made of flesh and blood, but against persons without bodies, the evil rulers of the unseen world, those mighty satanic beings and great evil princes of darkness who rule this world, and against huge numbers of wicked spirits in the spirit world. Always remember this: when someone is opposing you, you're not fighting the person as much as you're fighting the evil in this world that influences people. Pray for people. Pray against evil. And fourth, pray to keep your own heart clean. By which I mean to say, don't assume when you're in a conflict with someone that you are right. Ask God to show you the things in your heart that may have contributed to whatever opposition you're facing. Don't assume because somebody opposes you, they're evil. Especially when you're having conflict with a fellow believer. Don't pray about that believer. Sometimes I've had conflict with other believers, all right? And I found myself praying in a way that assumes that somehow God favors me over them. But we're both his kids. He loves that child as much as he loves me. And we have to keep a spirit of humility when we're praying about someone who's opposing us, who's a believer, that God doesn't get upset at us because we're talking bad about one of his other kids. Especially if that's your wife or husband, by the way. Do you get my point? So you pray to make sure your own heart is right, and you always approach God with humility. Here's the third thing, and this is where I'll start to wrap this up. Guys, I'm a little longer than I want to be. I don't know. The second service pulls about 5 minutes more out of me than the first service does. I don't know if that means that you now want to come to the first service or you're happy you're here, but it's just the way it is. I always go a little longer in this service, whatever. Here's the third thing. Enjoy the fight. Notice quotation marks around enjoy. It's a crazy thing to say. Enjoy the fight. Nehemiah 4:14, after I looked things over, Nehemiah said, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your families, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your homes. Look, guys, when we're facing opposition, we might as well enjoy the fight. Get on with it. Listen, Sebastian Junger is famous as a war correspondent, as a New York Times #1 best-selling author, an Academy Award nominated film, and Junger wrote a book that's called Tribe. Now listen, I don't know quite exactly what to think about all this. I'm just going to tell you what he said as he writes about the benefits of war. Now, I'm against war. I'm not for war. I'm just going to read to you what he wrote based on research that should inform a little bit about how we might think about the struggles we're in. All right? I'm going to read quick, and I'm going to read several paragraphs. It's kind of dispersed throughout this book. He wrote, the question of societal breakdown in the face of calamity suddenly became urgent in the run-up to World War II when the world powers were anticipating aerial bombardments deliberately calculated to cause mass hysteria in the cities. Before the war, projections for psychiatric breakdown in England ran as high as 4 million people. But as the Blitz progressed, psychiatric hospitals around the country saw admissions go down. Emergency services in London reported an average of only 2 cases of bomb neurosis a week. Psychiatrists watched in puzzlement as long-standing patients saw their symptoms subside during the period of intense air raids. Voluntary admissions to psychiatric wards noticeably declined, and even epileptics reported having fewer seizures. One doctor remarked, chronic neurotics of peacetime now drive ambulances. Another ventured to suggest that some people actually did better during wartime. One expert wrote in the Journal of Psychosomatic Research, when people are actively engaged in a cause, their lives have more purpose, with a resulting improvement in mental health. Younger writes, in addition to all the destruction and loss of life, war also inspires ancient human virtues of courage, loyalty, and selflessness that can be utterly intoxicating to the people who experience them. And then he gives considerable attention to veterans today who, and he says, among younger vets, deploying to Iraq or Afghanistan actually lowers the risk of suicide. It's when they come home and are no longer in the fight that they struggle. And to bring this down to a more real level, Younger writes, the war that is missed doesn't even have to be a shooting war. And then he quotes this person who says, I am a survivor of the AIDS epidemic. Now that AIDS is no longer a death sentence, I must admit that I miss those days of extreme brotherhood, which led to deep emotions and understandings that are above anything I have felt since the plague years. The idea is that there's something about being involved in fighting for a great cause that causes us to forget about many of the things that trouble us when we're comfortable in our lives. There's this passage in the Old Testament where the prophet says, woe to those who are at ease in Zion. In other words, if our lives get so comfortable that we're not struggling against enemies and fighting for a great cause, we tend to focus on a lot of things, pay a lot of attention to a lot of things that we wouldn't even be thinking about if we had something worthwhile to spend our time on. This is why God wrote in Judges, or this is why the writer of Judges writes, God's people had come to the promised land, they defeated a bunch of enemies, but God left some enemies there for the people's sake. In other words, God could work a miracle to get you from whatever goal you're working towards in a moment. But because God loves us, He allows us to face opposition because something important is going on in our lives. This is what God said to His people. Now these are the nations which the Lord left that He might test Israel by them. That is, all who had not known any of the wars in Canaan. This was only so that the generations of the children of Israel might be taught to know war, or at least those who had not formally known it. And here's fourth, it's finish the fight. I'll wrap this up quickly, guys. Nehemiah 6, when word came to send Ballot, Tobiah, Geshem the Arab, and the rest of our enemies that I had rebuilt the wall and not a gap was left in it, Sanballat and Geshem sent me this message. Come, and I just love the construction of this sentence. Come, let us meet together in one of the villages on the plain of Ono. Everybody say, Ono. But they were scheming to harm me, Nehemiah said, so I sent messengers to them with this reply. I am carrying on a great project and cannot go down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and go down to you? And then that section finishes like this. So the wall was completed miraculously in 52 days. So the wall's finally done, but Nehemiah's enemies aren't finished. They invite him to leave Mount Zion, Jerusalem, and to go down into the valley of Ono. But Nehemiah said, I know they're scheming against me. And essentially what Nehemiah said back is, oh no, I will not go down. I am doing a great work. Why should the project cease while I go down to you? And then the text said that they sent messages 4 more times, and after 4 times of Nehemiah saying what? Oh no, I will not go down. They sent a fifth, you're quick, you're quicker than the first crowd. They sent a fifth message, and the fifth message was an open letter that everybody could read about how bad Nehemiah was. These were flyers put on the doors and on the cars. This was an open Facebook post that was attacking Nehemiah. Nehemiah, come down and meet us in the valley of oh no. And Nehemiah said what? Oh no, I will not go down. And my encouragement to you today is whatever battle you're fighting, don't give up. Don't ever give up. Whatever's trying to get you to compromise, say, oh no, oh no. Oh, maybe this week you're going to be saying a lot of, oh no, oh no, oh no. I will not quit. I will not stop. You want me to give up here? No, I'm trying to do a good work. What did Nehemiah say? He said, oh no, I will not come down. I think I'm done.